Let's check in with Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine. We continue to hope and continue to really pay attention to your stories here every morning, Joseph. Thank you.
Joe. Little fucking Joe Lindsley.
Joe Lindsley is quickly becoming an American treasure in broadcasting.
Welcome to Ukraine Bank.
To Ukraine we go for Joseph Lindsley. We mentioned this yesterday, Joe, and I know you, as always, say you have to doubt anything that comes out of the Kremlin, and now we're hearing that the Kremlin will agree to an international investigation of that plane that went down with the POWs from Ukraine. Do we know anything more about that today?
Bob, well, good afternoon from Kharkiv. We actually had a quiet night here last night, which seems like a small miracle. And so, nice to be refreshed today with no missile attacks and still getting some of the fallout from what happened, the fallout reports and what happened over the past couple of days, including the death of a mother and her 8-year-old daughter while they were sleeping here in Kharkiv city. And as we look at the situation with the crash of this IL-76 plane over the Belgorod region of Russia. That region is actually the region of Russia that borders Kharkiv. From that city of Belgorod, that's where the Russians have been launching many of their attacks here on Kharkiv city, especially these past weeks. And I think the first thing to look at, when we hear Russia calling for an international investigation, Russians are, and going back to the Soviet days, they're always very shrewd at playing the information game. And so here we are now, all focused on a micro incident in a way, while ignoring the bigger story of the war. This entire war was an illegal invasion and a war crime. And, most Ukrainian soldiers who are, those who are fighting now, they never meant to be soldiers. These are civilians who are now forced by necessity to fight and defend their country. And so what Russia loves to do, though, is always to play the victim and to look like somehow they are playing by the international rules. And so even the very idea of Russia calling for an investigation is sort of, it's a mockery of any type of international law. And what it's trying to do is to push this narrative that to make sort of the world forget that what Russia's doing is bad from the beginning, and then it's sort of to pin down Ukraine on minutia in a way. And speaking of the minutia, there are many questions we have about this. I think the only things we know is that there was a plane that was shot down, and indeed, in the past couple of weeks, Ukrainians shot down two very similar Russian planes very successfully, and so it's conceivable that they have done this again. And we also know that there was a prisoner exchange was indeed planned between Ukraine and Russia. But what we don't know for sure is, were there Ukrainian prisoners of war on board, as the Russians claim? And if there were prisoners of war on board, this would seem, I think more than seem, this would be a clear violation of the Geneva Conventions. You're not to transport prisoners of war without some kind of Geneva Convention oversight. For example, like the Red Cross or some neutral power part of that transport. Clearly, if there were prisoners there was no Red Cross present. So Geneva Conventions were, even by Russia saying that there were prisoners on the plane, they're admitting that they violated Geneva Conventions. And there's also a great possibility that there was military cargo on board. And Ukrainian intelligence services released a statement yesterday, cryptically as always, but they suggested that they have to, in order, and they were specifically speaking about Kharkiv, the city and the region from which I'm speaking to you now, a place that has been so pummeled by the Russians since December 28th, especially again these past couple of days. They've hit the historic center of the city, they've hit civilian places, residences, and the Ukrainian military and the intelligence branch of the military said they because they don't have air defense like Patriot missiles to protect Kharkiv, and because they don't have long-range missiles to hit the bases from which Russia attacks Kharkiv, they have to be very creative, and they have to do everything they can to stop the source of these missiles. And so, looking at that statement, I think many people wonder, is Ukraine saying that that's what they were trying to do by shooting down this very powerful and crucial Russian plane that can play a role in directing attacks, or perhaps that was delivering warheads for the next round of attacks. So maybe there were Ukrainian prisoners of war on there, as human shields. Maybe there weren't. We don't know yet. But I think it's important not to let Russians control the discussion and the argument here.
Do I have this right, Joseph? This is day number 701 of this war. Did we pass 700?
Yeah, I forgot. I didn't realize it till right after we finished talking yesterday that yesterday was the 700th day of this, which is extraordinary in two ways. I mean, it's extremely tiring and exhausting, but also so often when we hear people talk about how long the war is being dragged out, we see those words sometimes. If the war had only lasted 100 days, that probably would mean that Ukraine would have lost, and so this means that Ukraine is holding on. And I think at some point, though, and the discussions are going to have to sort of focus on this point. If the West, will the West decide that this war can be won, and will they send the weapons needed to make a difference? Otherwise, this will just keep dragging on. And I was talking with people here in Kharkiv in the aftermath of those attacks, like the three attacks in some 24 hours the other day. And the Ukrainian word for victory, which I know people say it all the time, is paramoha. And until yesterday, I never really thought about what it really means. And there's a lot of linguists who think that the languages in this region, especially the Ukrainian language, are very tied to the original Indo-European language. That is the sort of the mother of so many tongues, all the way from Persia to the Atlantic coast of Europe, and that there's some evidence that those languages originated in these lands north of the Black Sea, and I can see that often in the Ukrainian language. There's a simplicity and a sort of a philosophy to the words. For example, the word for north is pivnich, which means halfway to the darkness, and the south is pivdin, which means halfway to the light. And those are also the same words for midnight and midday. And so the word for victory, paramoha, means it's something like moha means potential or might or your ability, and paramoha means when you have done something greater than your ability, greater than your might. And it's more even than it's not greater than you think you can do. It's greater than you actually can do. There's almost a mystical element to this idea of paramoha, sort of transcending even doing what you can't even achieve. And I think about that as Ukrainians. They have to be they're the underdogs here, and it's easy to forget that. I mean, because they've held on so long, it's easy to forget that they are they have fewer resources than Russia, certainly fewer human resources. And I think back to those early days and weeks, when the world was just watching. Before they sent the big weapons here, the world was watching to see if Ukraine could hold on. There was the great story of Poland. They weren't allowed to send fighter jets to Ukraine because the U.S. had not given permission. And so Poland disassembled fighter jets in the forest on the border with Ukraine and sort of sent over secret messages for Ukrainians, cross the border, grab the pieces of the jets and put them together. And so that's one example of all of these things together, whether it's the people here continuing cheerfully running their business when half of the shop is blown off by an attack. This idea of paramoha, when you have done something greater than your ability, and that's what Ukrainians continue to try to do every single day.
So many great human interest stories, and you're in the middle of one yourself there, Joseph. I know when the war started, you pulled together a team of volunteers, bartenders, musicians, university students, kind of a microcosm of the larger picture of the folks who are fighting the Russians there in Ukraine.
Yeah, and we're still going, and now thanks to great Americans and other people around the world, we're able to deliver trucks and drones every month to the front lines, and to keep telling the story, to share the reality of with the world. And on a basic level, I hope this is interesting. This is the story of great human drama. But then beyond being interesting, hopefully more and more people are inspired to help Ukraine achieve victory before too many lives are lost and before the story is concluded, before the story of freedom is wiped out in this part of the world.
We continue to hope and continue to really pay attention to your stories here every morning, Joseph. Thank you, and until tomorrow, peace.
Thank you, Bob. Until tomorrow.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Що він сказав?
Well, which side are you on?
На чиїй ти стороні?
Come on now. Oh, which side are you on?
На чиїй ти стороні?
Ебать.